Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
You know that feeling, right? Like drowning in information,
Oh, yeah.
emails and articles and reports.
Absolutely.
It can be so overwhelming.
Totally.
Well, in today's deep dive, we're going to learn how to cut through all that noise
Okay.
and not just understand information, but explain it clearly to other people.
Sounds good.
We're taking inspiration from communication expert and BBC journalist Ross Atkins.
Oh, he's great.
And lucky for us, we have an amazing expert here
Oh, stop.
to unpack his insights and help us figure out how all this applies to you.
I'm excited to dig in.
Me too.
Atkins is brilliant,
He is.
and his work is just so relevant,
Yeah.
especially in our information-saturated world.
So Atkins starts his book with this bold statement.
Oh.
He says, explanation matters. It sounds so simple, but when you really think about it,
Yeah.
it's kind of mind-blowing how true that is.
Yeah,
Across every aspect of life.
I agree.
And he illustrates this with some fantastic examples.
Like what?
Well, for instance, he talks about how a business owner with a really clear and concise pitch
Okay.
is far more likely to get investment than someone who can't articulate their vision.
Right?
Makes sense. But it's not just about those like big make or break moments.
Okay.
He also talks about how even something like explaining a theater's ticketing system clearly on their website can drastically reduce the number of confused customer service emails.
Wow, so it impacts everything.
It does.
Interesting.
He even uses the example of home renovations.
Okay.
You know, if the builder can explain exactly what they're going to do and when they're going to do it,
Yeah,
the chances of the family being happy with the finished product are way higher.
that makes sense.
Who knew? That clear communication
Yeah.
could be the key to domestic bliss.
That's funny.
It really is amazing how a little clarity can smooth out so many wrinkles in life.
Yeah.
But here's the thing.
Okay.
Explaining things well in today's world is a whole different ballgame. Well, Atkins calls it the era of infinite information. And for good reason.
Yeah.
He points to research that shows that professionals spend an average of 11 hours a week
Wow.
just on emails.
That's a lot.
So how do we make our explanations stand out in that deluge?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
It is.
It's not enough to just present the information anymore.
Right.
You really need to capture attention
Yeah.
and make a real impact.
Yeah.
It's about cutting through the noise and connecting with your audience
Yeah.
on a meaningful level.
So speaking of impact, or the lack thereof, Atkins shares this story about completely bombing a job interview
Oh, yeah.
at a prestigious newspaper.
Oof.
And get this,
What?
it wasn't because he lacked knowledge or experience.
Really?
It's because he failed to explain himself effectively.
It happens.
Oh,
It's a
yeah.
cautionary tale.
It is.
And I think it's something we can probably all relate to on some level.
Oh, for sure.
We've all had those moments where we just stumble through an explanation and wish we could hit rewind and try again.
Oh, totally.
But the good news is Atkins doesn't just leave us hanging.
Okay.
He lays out a framework for becoming a better explainer,
Okay. I like it.
starting with 10 key elements of a good explanation.
All right, let's delve into those. The first one,
Okay.
and I think this one's particularly relevant to our listeners,
Yeah.
is relevance.
Okay.
It's about making sure every piece of information serves a purpose. No tangents, no unnecessary fluff.
Got it.
So why is that so crucial in the world that we live in?
Well, think about it. We are constantly bombarded with information.
Yes.
Our brains are working overtime just to
Right.
process it all. So if your explanation
Yeah.
isn't laser focused on what's truly essential,
Yeah.
you risk losing your audience entirely.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack. If you're not clear on what you're looking for,
Yeah.
you'll just get lost in the chaos.
That's a fantastic analogy. And speaking of finding that needle, the next element Atkins highlights is precision.
Oh, okay.
It sounds basic, but he really emphasizes choosing your words carefully
Right?
to avoid ambiguity and confusion.
Yeah.
I mean, even seemingly simple concepts can get muddled in communication.
That's true.
Have you ever received instructions that were so vague?
Oh, yeah.
You ended up more confused than when you started.
All the time.
That's what happens when there's a lack of precision.
Makes sense.
Nobody wants to do mental gymnastics to understand what you're saying.
No, they don't.
And that brings us to another point.
Okay.
Atkins stresses minimizing distractions,
Uh-huh.
both verbal and visual.
This is where things get really interesting.
It is.
I'm curious to hear about this outside source rule he developed for his show.
So when Atkins was developing Outside Source, he was very intentional about the visuals.
Okay.
He had this ironclad rule.
What was it?
That any visuals on screen had to directly relate to what he was talking about. At that exact moment, no random B-roll, just for the sake of filling space.
Wow.
He felt that kind of visual clutter actually made people tune out.
Interesting.
Because their brains were trying to process all that extra unnecessary information.
That makes sense.
Right. If the visuals are competing with the message, it's going to create a cognitive overload.
Yeah.
Our brains can only handle so much input at once.
Exactly.
And that actually leads perfectly to the next element Atkins discusses, engagement.
Engagement. Okay.
He's adamant that structuring information in a way that keeps people hooked is absolutely essential.
Huh.
He even talks about learning this. Through observing radio audience research, apparently tiny tweaks in pacing and structure can make a huge difference.
Really?
In whether someone tunes out or stays glued.
It's amazing how small, deliberate changes have such a big impact. It really speaks to the psychology of learning.
Right.
You know, we're not wired for passive information absorption. Our brains crave stimulation, novelty, connection.
It's like you need to create a little intrigue to keep people on the edge of their seats.
Totally.
So how do we do that? Well, Atkins argues that a big part of it is making sure your explanations are useful.
Usefulness.
Yeah.
It's not just about presenting a bunch of facts.
Well,
it's about anticipating what your audience needs.
Yes.
And delivering information that's relevant to their lives and their goals.
It's about moving beyond knowing to doing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Giving them those so what answers.
Yes, exactly. That's what makes an explanation truly stick.
And that leads us to another crucial aspect of effective explanation.
Okay.
Knowing your audience. Atkins emphasizes that it's not just about what you explain, but who you're explaining it to.
Right. It's like that saying, if you're talking to everyone, you're talking to no one.
Exactly. You have to tailor your approach based on who's listening.
Totally.
And one of the first things Atkins suggests is doing a sort of knowledge assessment, figuring out what your audience already knows so you can build on that foundation. Instead of rehashing familiar ground.
I see.
He actually tells this funny story.
Oh, I love his stories.
About his time on In-Flight Radio.
Okay.
Where he was giving these super detailed explanations of cultural events happening in the cities where the planes were landing. But then he realized that most of his listeners were well on a plane.
Oh, right.
And likely never even going to those events.
Makes sense.
It's a perfect example of how important it is to consider your audience's context.
Totally.
He was oversharing unnecessary details because he hadn't really thought about what his listeners actually needed or wanted to know.
It's like showing up to a potluck with a dish nobody likes. All effort, no enjoyment.
Exactly.
And beyond just gauging existing knowledge.
Yeah.
Atkins also talks about tailoring how you explain something.
Okay.
Based on your audience's learning style.
Oh, interesting.
Are they visual learners? Do they prefer summaries or deep dives?
Yeah.
We know our listeners appreciate concise, memorable information.
Right.
So we always try to keep that in mind when we're crafting these episodes.
It's about understanding those preferences and adapting your communication accordingly. If you know someone thrives on visuals, maybe you incorporate more diagrams or examples.
I see.
Or if you're talking to someone who loves to get into the nitty-gritty, you might go deeper into the details.
It's all about meeting your audience where they are.
Exactly.
And making them feel like you're speaking directly to them, which ties into another one of Atkins' points.
What's that?
Making it personal.
Oh, okay.
Conveying why this information matters to your listener. Why should they care?
This is where you connect the dots between the information you're sharing and their world, their needs, their goals. It's about cutting through the noise of generic advice and making it resonate on a deeper level.
I like that. It's that aha moment when something clicks and you realize, wow, this actually applies to my life.
Precisely. It's about making the information actionable and relevant, giving your audience a reason to lean in and pay attention.
Okay, now get ready for this.
Oh, yep.
Atkins lays out this fantastic 7-step process for what he calls dynamic explanation.
All right.
It's a toolkit specifically designed for those moments when you need to explain something clearly and effectively on the fly without a ton of prep time.
Okay.
I think our listeners who are always on the go are going to love this.
It's incredibly practical.
It is.
And it starts with preparation.
Okay.
Gather the right information. Identify potential questions your audience might have. And perhaps most importantly these days, be discerning about your sources.
Oh, that's so important.
It is.
He even talks about this really test for sniffing out potential inaccuracies.
Oh, yeah.
Which is crucial in this age of misinformation.
It's about developing that critical eye, that healthy skepticism.
Yeah.
If the foundation of your explanation is built on shaky ground, the whole thing crumbles. So true. You have to start with solid information.
You do.
And then once you've got that,
okay,
Atkins emphasizes the importance of organizing and refining it.
Right.
He's a big believer in distilling things down to their essence, finding those smallest nuggets of information, and then weaving them together into a coherent story.
He uses a great example of covering the Greek debt crisis, which was this incredibly complex, rapidly evolving story he had to figure out how to present the information in a way that made sense, even amidst all the chaos.
That sounds like a real challenge.
It was. And it brings us to the steps that I think often trip people up.
Yes.
Verbalizing and memorizing.
All right.
It's about actually practicing your explanation out loud and finding techniques to help you remember key points.
This is where a lot of people get stuck.
It is.
But it's so crucial.
It is.
It's not enough to just have the information in your head.
Right.
You need to be able to articulate it clearly and confidently. Yes, it's like learning a new dance routine. You have to practice those steps until they become second nature.
I love that analogy. And speaking of making things stick,
Yeah.
Atkins talks about a technique called the memory palace,
Oh, yeah.
which uses visual imagery and spatial awareness to help you remember things.
Have you ever tried that?
I haven't, but I've heard of it.
It's brilliant. It taps into the way our brains are naturally wired to remember information. Instead of just trying to memorize a list of facts, you associate those facts with familiar places or objects, creating these mental hooks that make them easier to recall.
So it's like building a mental map of your knowledge.
Exactly. And it can be incredibly effective, especially for those of us who struggle with traditional memorization techniques.
That's fantastic. I'm definitely going to have to try that.
You should.
Okay, the final step in Atkins's dynamic explanation process is all about questions.
Okay.
And he doesn't see them as interruptions. He sees them as opportunities.
That's a really important distinction.
It is.
It's about shifting your mindset from presenting to engaging.
I see.
Questions allow you to tailor your explanation to the specific needs of the moment.
Yeah.
To make it truly interactive.
He even talks about this technique called mirroring language.
Oh, it's that.
Which involves subtly using some of the same words or phrases the questioner used.
It's a way of building rapport,
Yeah.
of showing that you're actively listening and that you value their input. It creates a sense of connection and understanding.
And of course, let's be real. Sometimes you get a question that throws you for a loop.
Oh, yeah.
Something you just don't know the answer to.
It happens all the time.
Atkins gives some great tips for navigating those moments gracefully.
Like what?
It's about staying calm, acknowledging the question, maybe offering a partial answer, or pointing them towards a resource,
Right.
and then smoothly transitioning back to something you do know.
It's like a verbal swerve, but done with finesse.
Exactly. It's all about maintaining your credibility and keeping the conversation flowing in a productive direction.
Okay, so we've covered this incredibly powerful 7-step process for dynamic explanations.
Yes.
But what about those everyday situations where you don't need a full-blown presentation?
Yes.
The quick explanations, the ones we often fire off without much thought.
Right.
Atkins has some great advice for these too.
I'm all ears.
And he uses email as a prime example.
Okay. Because let's be honest.
Yeah.
We all spend way too much time wrestling with email.
He stresses the importance of clear, concise subject lines that accurately reflect the content of the email. Think of it as a mini explanation right from the start.
So no more vague subject lines like following up or quick question.
Exactly. Be specific.
Got it.
Tell your recipient exactly what the email is about, and then once they open it, get to the point quickly.
Okay.
Don't bury the key information under paragraphs of unnecessary background or preamble.
It's about respecting your recipient's time.
It is. And recognizing that they likely have a mountain of other emails to wade through.
He actually calls overly long emails an unkind tax on the recipient.
I love that.
Me too. It's such a great way of putting it. It's a reminder that conciseness isn't just about efficiency. It's a form of consideration.
Absolutely.
And think about how many unnecessary back-and-forth emails you can avoid.
Oh, yeah.
By just being clear and upfront from the start.
So many.
It's a win-win for everyone involved.
It is.
So it's about applying those same principles of clarity and relevance.
Yeah.
Even to those seemingly quick, everyday explanations.
Exactly. Whether you're writing an email, sending a text message, summarizing a meeting, or just explaining something to a friend, bringing that intentionality and focus to your communication can make a world of difference.
It really is amazing how these small tweaks in our communication can have this ripple effect, making us more effective and understood in every interaction.
Right.
And to wrap things up, I wanted to share one last thought from Atkins that really resonated with me. He describes explanation as a window cleaning exercise.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
It's so simple, yet so powerful.
Right. It's like the clearer the window, the better the view.
Yeah.
And I think it applies so perfectly to how we communicate.
Absolutely. It's about removing the smudges, the distractions, the unnecessary clutter to create a space where true understanding can take place.
I see.
When we can see things clearly, we can connect more deeply and meaningfully.
And that's what I find so compelling about Atkins' work. He gives us these practical tools for becoming better explainers, but he also reminds us why it matters on a deeper level.
Because clear explanation isn't just about conveying information. It's about fostering connection, building bridges of understanding, and helping others see the world in a new light.
It's about making those aha moments possible, where someone grasps a concept in a way they never have before.
In a world that often feels increasingly complex and confusing, I think that's a skill worth mastering.
Absolutely. So as you go out into your day, dear listener, I want to leave you with this challenge. What windows need cleaning in your communication?
Ooh, I like that. What can you clarify? What can you simplify? What can you make more engaging and impactful?
Because remember, the power of explanation is in your hands. The more clearly you can explain yourself and the world around you, the more effectively you can connect with others, collaborate, and truly make a difference.
So go forth and shine those windows. Let the light of understanding shine through.
That's a wrap for today's deep dive into the art of explaining anything. I hope you learned some valuable insights from Roz Atkins and feel inspired to become an even better communicator.
And remember, the journey of learning and explaining never truly ends.
That's true.
There's always a new window to clean, a new perspective to share.
Until next time, happy explaining.